PC versus Mac, which is better? So recently I got this Mac Pro and this cinema display, and I also recently got this PC. So I thought it'd be kind of interesting to see what the differences are between the two. If a 12-year-old beast of a computer can beat out a brand new PC. So as for specs for the Mac, it has an Intel Xeon W3520, 16 gigs of RAM, a GT 120, and a hard drive. As for the PC, it's got an AMD Ryzen 5 5600G, 16 gigs of RAM, no graphics card, because this is an APU, a really good APU, and it's running off an NVMe drive. And this side over here is actually my personal setup that I use for everything: gaming, editing, watching YouTube, and it works really well for that. As for this thing, watching YouTube, it's okay. It can only do 1080p, not 1440 or 4K. In fact, I don't even have an option to do that. I'm not really sure why that is. When I had my GTX 650 in here, I did a little bit of editing on the video about putting the GTX 650 in. And for editing, it does pretty good, almost the same as the PC side over here. And it really isn't all that slow, even though it is running on a hard drive. The GT 120, with it in there right now, it isn't the greatest. There's artifacting all over Mojave. That could just because it's not a metal supported GPU. But it does pretty well for being 12 years old. Most PCs that are 12 years old can't do half the things that this thing can. And that's one of the unique things about Macs, is that you can get them 10, 12, 14 years later and they'll still be pretty good. You'll still be able to use them for everyday anything. As far as PCs, the ones that are 10, 12, 14 years old, they haven't aged that well. So now what you've all been waiting for, benchmarks. Starting off with the Mac Pro. In Geekbench 5, it gets a single core score of 510, so not really all that great, and a multi-core score of 1969. In Cinebench R20, the Mac gets 1913. I wasn't able to run Unigine Heaven, not really sure why. It gave me an error, but I didn't really understand it. Now moving on to the PC. In Geekbench 5, we got a single core score of 1466. For multi-core, we got a score of 7024. In Cinebench R20, we got a score of 3900. And in Unigine Heaven, we got a score of 809, with an average FPS of 32.1. So, in the end, this, after all the benchmarks, dumps on this. Not to say that this is terrible, but this is obviously much better. Then again, this is 600 bucks. This entire setup right here is about a total of 500, whereas this, it's 600. It's about a lot for all of this right here. This is relatively simple and cheap, but really when using them, you can't tell that big of a difference. Like when editing on this, it handles 1080p pretty good. When editing on this, obviously it's gonna handle 1080p much better, but it isn't that big of a difference between the two. This can do 4K decently well, and this I never even tested 4K because I doubt it would do all that good. And when doing simple things like watching YouTube, it's pretty good. Like, I can't really tell the difference between the two of these, other than that this one can only do 1080 and this one can do 4K. But also, this is the lowest end version of this Mac Pro that you can get. The absolute cheapest, without a single upgrade. So putting in dual Xeons with 64 gigs of RAM, an RX 580, 590, something like that, and an NVMe SSD would probably get it pretty close to this, which would really surprise me if I did all those upgrades and we could get pretty much the exact same performance as this. So let me know if you'd like to see me upgrade this thing, put dual Xeons, 64 gigs of RAM, a graphics card. I don't know if I can get an RX 580 or 590. Let me know if you want to see that. This, I don't have any plans to upgrade for quite a while because it's really good the way that it is. So yeah, this was a really fun experiment for me to see exactly what the difference was between Mac versus PC, brand new versus 12 years old. So please subscribe. We're getting close to 100. Thank you everyone who has already subscribed, and I'll see you in the next video.